The dusty shelves of the general store held more memories than merchandise, and Adelaide Norris had grown accustomed to sweeping away both as the scorching California sun beat down on Sacramento's Main Street in the summer of 1878. Her husband Thomas had been dead 3 years now, taken by pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter, leaving her with a store full of debts and dreams that seemed to crumble more with each passing season. At 26, Adelaide had already lived what felt like several lifetimes, first as a hopeful bride who had traveled west with her merchant husband, then as a widow trying desperately to keep his legacy alive. The problem was that Thomas had been better at dreaming than planning, and the store's location on the far end of town meant most folks forgot it existed. The newer establishments closer to the railroad depot had slowly bled away her customer base until some days she wondered why she bothered unlocking the door at all. The bell above the entrance chimed, startling her from her melancholy thoughts. Adelaide looked up from the ledger where red numbers dominated the pages, expecting perhaps a lost traveler or someone seeking directions. Instead, a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds stepped inside, removing his dusty hat to reveal dark brown hair that needed cutting. He looked to be in his early 30s, with the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his days working cattle under an unforgiving sky. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice carrying the rough warmth of someone unaccustomed to lengthy conversation. "Name's Ethan Irving. New to the area, working at the Morrison Ranch about 5 miles south. Heard there was a general store down this way." Adelaide straightened her worn calico dress and tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Adelaide Norris. Welcome to Sacramento, Mr. Irving. I'm afraid my inventory isn't what it used to be, but I'll help you find whatever you need." Ethan's gaze swept across the sparsely stocked shelves with an expression that betrayed nothing. "Looking for tobacco, some coffee beans, and lamp oil if you have it." Relief flooded through her. These were items she actually had in stock, though the tobacco was getting dry and the coffee beans were from a shipment she'd purchased 6 months ago. "Of course. Let me gather those for you." As she moved about the store, acutely aware of how her footsteps echoed in the near-empty space, Ethan remained near the counter, his hat turning slowly in his hands. She could feel his eyes following her movements, though not in a way that made her uncomfortable. If anything, his gaze seemed curious, perhaps even sympathetic. "How long have you been running this place?" he asked as she measured out coffee beans into a paper sack. 5 years total, 3 of them on my own since my husband passed." She wasn't sure why she volunteered that last bit of information. Perhaps because the silence had grown too heavy, or because something about this stranger's quiet presence made her want to fill the void with words. "That's a hard thing, managing alone." Ethan's voice carried genuine empathy rather than pity, which Adelaide appreciated. She'd had enough pitying looks from the town's matrons to last a lifetime. Hard, yes, but honest work. She placed his items on the counter and calculated the total, naming a price that was probably too low, but she needed the sale more than she needed pride. Ethan paid without haggling, which immediately set him apart from most of her former customers who had always tried to negotiate her prices down to nothing. As he gathered his purchases, he paused. "I'll likely be back next week. Ranch keeps me busy, but I prefer supporting smaller establishments when I can." After he left, Adelaide stood in the doorway and watched him mount a gray mare tied outside, wondering if he'd actually return or if that was just something polite people said. The afternoon stretched ahead of her, long and empty as the shelves surrounding her, but the following Tuesday, true to his word, Irving walked through her door again. This time he needed work gloves, which she had, and some canned peaches, which she didn't. Supply wagon hasn't come through in a while, she admitted, embarrassed by her lack of inventory. The newer stores get priority deliveries. That's all right, Ethan replied easily. The gloves are what I really need anyway. Those peaches were just a craving. Adelaide found herself smiling despite the situation's frustration. I could order some with my next shipment if you'd like. Might take a few weeks, but I can set aside a few cans for you. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a softening around his eyes. I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Norris. Adelaide is fine, she heard herself say. Then you should call me Ethan. A pattern emerged over the following weeks. Every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork, Ethan would ride into town and stop at Adelaide's store. Sometimes he needed supplies, small things like thread for mending or salt or matches. Other times his purchases seemed almost unnecessary, as though he was inventing reasons to visit. He bought a bar of soap when Adelaide suspected he had plenty. He purchased a tin of saddle wax despite his tack looking freshly maintained. She never called him out on it, partly because she needed every sale, but mostly because she found herself looking forward to those visits with an anticipation that both warmed and worried her. During his third week of regular visits, a summer rainstorm rolled through Sacramento with unexpected fury. Adelaide was preparing to close early, knowing no one would venture out in such weather, when Ethan appeared in her doorway, water streaming from his hat and coat. "Good Lord, you're soaked through," she exclaimed, immediately moving toward the small stove in the corner where she kept a pot of coffee warm during business hours. "What are you doing out in this? Needed nails," he said, holding up a thoroughly drenched paper sack. "Fence broke in the wind." Those could have waited until the storm passed. Adelaide poured coffee into a chipped mug and pressed it into his hands. "You'll catch your death." Ethan's fingers brushed hers as he accepted the cup, sending an unexpected jolt through her. Maybe. Or maybe I was already in town and figured I'd stop by anyway. Their eyes met, and Adelaide felt something shift between them, subtle as the change in air pressure before lightning strikes. She busied herself with finding a cloth for him to dry off, trying to ignore the way her heart had begun beating faster. "Why do you really come here, Ethan?" The question escaped before she could stop it, emboldened perhaps by the storm's fury or the intimacy of the moment. "There are 3 other general stores in Sacramento, all with better stock than mine." Ethan took a long drink of coffee, considering his words. At first, honestly, convenience. Morrison's ranch is on this end of town, so it made sense. But then I met you, and I saw how hard you're working to keep this place going despite everything being stacked against you. Reminded me of myself in a way. I've been working ranches since I was 15, saving every penny, trying to build something of my own. It's not easy when you're starting from nothing. Adelaide leaned against the counter, surprised by his candor. "Where are you from originally?" "Missouri. Family farm went under after the war, lost my father and oldest brother at Shiloh." Pain flickered across his features, old but still sharp. "Mother tried to keep the place running, but without them it was impossible. She remarried eventually, moved to Chicago with my younger siblings. I was 18 by then, figured I'd make my own way." "I'm sorry," Adelaide said softly, "about your father and brother." "Long time ago now, but thank you." Ethan set down his empty mug. "What about you? How'd you end up in California?" Adelaide found herself telling him her story, how she'd met Thomas in Boston where she'd been working as a seamstress. He'd been charming and full of grand plans, convinced that California was the land of opportunity. They'd married quickly, perhaps too quickly, and headed west with hopes as big as the sky. The reality had been harder than either anticipated. The store struggled from the start, and Thomas's health had always been fragile. "You regret it coming west?" Ethan asked. Adelaide thought about that. "I regret that Thomas didn't get to see his dreams fulfilled. But no, I don't regret California. For all its challenges, there's a freedom here I never felt back east. Even running a failing store, I'm my own woman. That counts for something." The storm raged outside, rain hammering against the windows while thunder rolled across the valley. Ethan showed no inclination to leave, and Adelaide realized she didn't want him to. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about working cattle, the long days under the sun, the satisfaction of honest labor. She shared her frustrations with suppliers who wouldn't extend credit, with townspeople who'd forgotten her store existed, with the loneliness that sometimes threatened to swallow her whole. "You ever think about closing up, trying something else?" Ethan asked as the storm finally began to ease. "Every day," Adelaide admitted. "But then I think about Thomas, about how this was his dream. Feels like giving up on him if I let it go." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "From what you've told me, seems like Thomas would want you to be happy more than he'd want you to be miserable running a store that's drowning you in debt." The words struck deeper than Adelaide expected, perhaps because she'd thought them herself countless times but never spoken them aloud. "Maybe, but what else would I do? This store is all I know now. You could sell it. Even a failing store has some value in the property and remaining inventory." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Use that money to start fresh, do something you actually want to do. And what would that be?" Adelaide heard the bitterness in her own voice. "I'm a widow with no family and few prospects. The store at least gives me purpose, even if it's slowly killing me." Ethan reached across the counter, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. "You're also smart, capable, and stronger than you give yourself credit for. Those are worth more than any amount of inventory." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back angrily. She wasn't used to kindness, to someone seeing her as more than the failing widow woman struggling to survive. "Thank you," she whispered. The sky outside had lightened to pearl gray as the storm moved east. Ethan collected his nails and prepared to leave, but paused at the door. "Adelaide, I meant what I said. About your strength. Don't forget that." After he left, Adelaide stood alone in her store, feeling the weight of their conversation settling around her shoulders. She'd lived the past 3 years in a kind of suspended animation, going through the motions of survival without really considering what came next. Ethan's words had cracked something open inside her, let light into spaces she'd kept deliberately dark. The pattern of his visits continued, but something had fundamentally shifted after that rainy afternoon. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. Adelaide found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, thoughts and fears she'd kept locked away. Ethan proved to be an excellent listener, offering advice only when asked, but always providing a steady, comforting presence. She learned that he'd been engaged once, back in Missouri, to a girl named Catherine who'd broken things off when he'd decided to go west. Said she couldn't imagine leaving her family, Ethan explained one sweltering August afternoon. "Can't say I blame her. It was a big risk, heading out here with nothing but hope and determination." "Do you ever regret it, leaving her?" Adelaide asked, surprised by how much she wanted to know the answer. Ethan shook his head. "Not anymore. At the time it hurt like hell, but we wanted different things. She needed roots and certainty. I needed to build something myself, prove I could make it on my own terms. If she'd come with me out of obligation rather than desire, we both would have ended up miserable." Adelaide understood that sentiment better than he knew. She and Thomas had loved each other in their way, but their marriage had been built more on desperation and convenience than genuine partnership. He'd needed someone to help with the store, and she'd needed escape from the suffocating expectations of Boston society. It had worked, mostly, but it had never been the grand passion novels promised. By September, Adelaide had to admit something she'd been avoiding for weeks. Ethan Irving wasn't just her only customer anymore. He'd become the best part of her days, the reason she took extra care with her appearance each morning, the person whose opinions mattered most to her. She was falling for him, had probably already fallen, and the realization terrified her. Love made you vulnerable. Love meant risking everything. Adelaide had already lost one husband, and the grief had nearly destroyed her. Could she really open herself to that possibility again? But watching Ethan browse her nearly empty shelves with the same careful attention he'd shown on his first visit, listening to him ask about her day with genuine interest, seeing the way his eyes lit up when she laughed at his stories, Adelaide wondered if protecting her heart was worth the cost of denying what was growing between them. It was Ethan who finally forced the issue, though not intentionally. He arrived on a Tuesday in late September looking troubled, his usual easy demeanor replaced by something heavier. Adelaide noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "Morrison's selling the ranch," Ethan said without preamble. "His daughter back in Pennsylvania is sick, and he wants to be with her. He's offered me foreman position with the new owner, whoever that ends up being, but there's no guarantee they'll honor it." Adelaide's chest tightened. "So what does that mean for you?" "Might mean nothing. Might mean I need to find work elsewhere." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I've been saving money, hoping to buy land of my own soon, but I'm not quite there yet. If I have to move on, find another ranch job, it could set me back years." "Where would you go?" The question came out smaller than Adelaide intended. Ethan's storm-gray eyes found hers. "Depends on where the work is. Could be anywhere from here to Montana." He paused, then added quietly, "I don't want to leave Sacramento, though. I've got reasons to stay." The air between them charged with unspoken meaning. Adelaide gripped the counter's edge, her knuckles white. "What reasons?" "You know what reasons, Adelaide." Ethan moved closer, his voice dropping low. "I've been coming to this store twice a week for months now, buying things I don't need, spending money I should be saving, all because I can't stay away from you. Tell me you haven't noticed. Tell me I've been imagining the way you smile when I walk through that door." Adelaide's breath caught. Hearing him say it aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been when it was just her private thoughts. "I've noticed," she whispered, "but Ethan, I'm a widow. I've got nothing to offer you. This store is failing, I'm drowning in debt, and I'm not the fresh young thing you deserve." "Stop." Ethan closed the remaining distance between them, his hands coming to rest on the counter on either side of where she stood, caging her in without touching. "I don't want a fresh young thing. I want a woman who knows hardship and hasn't let it make her bitter. I want someone who fights for what matters even when the odds are impossible. I want you, Adelaide, just as you are, failing store and all." "You're crazy," she said, but there was no heat in it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Maybe." A smile tugged at his lips, "but I'm also honest. I've been alone a long time, Adelaide. Focused on work and saving money and building towards some future that always seemed just out of reach. Then I walked into this store and met you, and for the first time in years, I wanted something more than just land and cattle. I wanted companionship. Partnership. I wanted someone to build that future with." Adelaide felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I lost Thomas and it nearly broke me. What if something happens to you? What if I let myself care and then you're gone?" Ethan reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and wiped her tears with his thumb. The gesture was so gentle it made her cry harder. "I can't promise nothing will happen. Life's too unpredictable for that. But I can promise that however much time we get, I'll spend it doing my damnedest to make you happy. That's all any of us can offer." "That's not much of a guarantee," Adelaide said through her tears. "No," Ethan agreed, "but it's honest. And I think you deserve honesty more than pretty lies." Adelaide looked up at him, this cowboy who'd wandered into her failing store and somehow become essential to her survival. She thought about the past 3 years she'd spent in limbo, neither truly living nor quite dying, just existing in the gray space between. She thought about the fear that had kept her frozen, trapped by memories of loss and pain. Then she thought about what Ethan was offering, the terrifying possibility of trying again, of choosing hope over safety. "Kiss me," she whispered. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He leaned down, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both gentle and claiming. Adelaide melted into it, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, holding him close as though he might disappear if she let go. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness falling away in the space of a heartbeat. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adelaide felt as though she'd been remade. "Does this mean you're willing to take a chance on us?" Ethan asked, his forehead resting against hers. "I think it means I'm willing to try," Adelaide replied. "Though I still don't know what that looks like, practically speaking. You might have to move for work and I'm stuck here with this store. Then we figure it out together." Ethan pulled back enough to look at her properly. "Maybe it's time to really consider what I said before." "About selling the store." Adelaide opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. The old arguments rose automatically about duty and Thomas's memory and not being a quitter. But underneath those well-worn excuses, she heard the truth. She didn't want the store, she'd never wanted it, not really. It had been Thomas's dream, and she'd been trying to honor him by keeping it alive. But Ethan was right. Thomas wouldn't want her to sacrifice her happiness out of misguided loyalty. "Even if I sold it, what then?" she asked. "The debt would eat up most of whatever I could get. I'd be starting from nothing. So would I if Morrison's ranch sells and the new owner doesn't keep me on," Ethan pointed out. "But maybe nothing isn't the worst place to start. Means we could build something together from the ground up, make it exactly what we want instead of trying to fix what's already broken." The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Adelaide had spent so long clinging to the wreckage of her old life that she'd forgotten what it felt like to imagine something new. "What are you proposing, exactly?" Ethan grinned. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I've got some money saved, and you'd have whatever's left after settling your debts. Between us, we might have enough to make a go of something. Small ranch, maybe, or we could head further north, try our luck in the mining towns that are still booming. Point is, we'd have options." "You're talking about a future together," Adelaide said slowly. "A real future." "I am," Ethan confirmed. "If you're interested." Adelaide thought about it, really thought about it for the first time. Life with Ethan would be hard work. It would mean leaving behind the familiar, even if the familiar was slowly killing her. It would mean trusting someone again, opening herself to loss and pain. But it would also mean partnership, companionship, the chance to build something meaningful with someone who saw her as an equal rather than just a helpmate. "I'm interested," she said finally. Terrified, but interested. Relief and joy flooded Ethan's face. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. "Then we start making plans," he murmured against her lips. "Together." News of Morrison's ranch sale spread quickly through Sacramento, and with it came news of the buyer. A wealthy cattle baron from Texas named Robert Harrison purchased the property with plans to expand operations significantly. He arrived in town, 2 weeks after Adelaide and Ethan's conversation. A big man with an impressive mustache and business savvy to match. To everyone's surprise, including Ethan's, Harrison not only honored Morrison's promise to keep Ethan as foreman but offered him an increased salary. Says he did his research and heard I'm the best hand in 3 counties, Ethan told Adelaide, looking both pleased and bashful. Offered me a 5-year contract with the option to buy a parcel of ranch land at the end of it. Something about wanting to incentivize good workers to stay long-term. That's wonderful, Adelaide said, meaning it, but part of her felt a twist of disappointment. With Ethan's job secure, their half-formed plans for striking out together lost their urgency. She was happy for him, truly, but she'd started letting herself imagine a different life, and it was hard to let that go. Ethan must have read something in her expression because he took her hands. This doesn't change anything between us, Adelaide. If anything, it gives us a stronger foundation to build on. I'll have steady income, and in 5 years I could own land outright. That's more security than I've had since leaving Missouri. Of course, Adelaide said quickly. I'm glad for you, truly. It's a fantastic opportunity. But, Ethan prompted. Adelaide sighed. But I suppose I'd gotten caught up in the romance of it all, running off together, starting fresh somewhere new. Sounds silly now that I say it aloud. It's not silly. Ethan squeezed her hands. And we can still start fresh, just here instead of somewhere else. You should still sell the store, Adelaide. Use whatever money's left to pay off debts and start over. You could do anything you want. Open a boarding house, start a seamstress business, hell, just take some time to figure out what actually makes you happy. With my salary increased, I could help support you while you get established. I can't ask you to do that, Adelaide protested. We're not even engaged. Ethan's eyes glinted with something that might have been mischief. That's easily remedied if you're willing. Adelaide's heart stuttered. What? Marry me? Ethan said it simply, as though proposing marriage was no more complicated than asking about the weather. I know it's fast, but we're not children. We both know what we want, and I want you. Want to build a life with you, wake up next to you, share all the boring, everyday moments alongside the exciting ones. Marry me, Adelaide. You're serious, she breathed, completely. Ethan pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. I love you. Probably have since that day you offered me coffee during the storm. Say yes. Adelaide's mind raced. It was too fast, too reckless, too much like the impulsive decision she'd made with Thomas. But this felt different. She knew Ethan in a way she'd never really known her first husband. They'd spent months talking, sharing their hopes and fears and dreams. This wasn't desperation or convenience. This was genuine connection, real affection, the kind of partnership she'd always wanted but never had. Yes, she said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. Yes, I'll marry you. Ethan whooped and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the empty store while she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Adelaide felt the last of her reservations melt away. This was right. Terrifying and uncertain, but right. They married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Sacramento's small church. Adelaide wore a dove-gray dress she'd sewn herself, practical but pretty with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan cleaned up remarkably well in a borrowed suit, his hair finely trimmed and his boots polished. Morrison and his wife attended, along with Ethan's boss Harrison and a few other ranch hands. Adelaide's friend Margaret, one of the few townspeople who'd remained loyal during her struggles, stood as witness. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Selling the store proved more complicated than anticipated. Adelaide had to sort through years of inventory, cataloging what remained and determining its value. The building itself needed repairs before anyone would seriously consider buying it. Ethan helped during his time off, patching the roof and fixing the sagging front steps. Together they scrubbed away years of accumulated dust and neglect, revealing the store's original bones beneath the decay. A young couple from back east, newly arrived in California with dreams of establishing themselves, eventually made an offer. It wasn't much, barely enough to cover Adelaide's debts with a little left over, but it was honest money and it was freedom. Adelaide signed the papers in November, 3 months after marrying Ethan, and walked away from the store that had been her prison and her purpose for so long. "How does it feel?" Ethan asked as they stood outside watching the new owners carry in their belongings. "Strange," Adelaide admitted. "Like I should feel sadder than I do, but mostly I just feel relieved." "Good." Ethan put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close against the autumn chill. "Ready to go home?" Home was a small cottage on Harrison's ranch, provided as part of Ethan's compensation. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but it was clean and sturdy and theirs. Adelaide had spent the past months making it cozy, sewing curtains and cushions, arranging their modest possessions into something that felt lived in and welcoming. After years of living above the store, surrounded by reminders of failure and loss, the cottage felt like paradise. Marriage suited them both. They fell into an easy rhythm, Ethan rising before dawn to begin his work while Adelaide kept the house and began taking in sewing work from ranch families. She discovered she was actually quite good at it, better than she'd remembered from her days in Boston. Word spread, and soon she had a steady stream of customers needing everything from basic mending to elaborate dresses. The money wasn't much, but combined with Ethan's salary, they were comfortable. More than comfortable, Adelaide realized one evening as she sat by the fire while Ethan read aloud from a dime novel he'd picked up in town. They were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she'd never experienced before. With Thomas, there had always been an undercurrent of anxiety, the sense that they were one disaster away from collapse. With Ethan, she felt secure, not because life had become easier, but because they faced it together as true partners. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing her staring at him instead of listening to the story. "How lucky I am," Adelaide said honestly. "How different my life is from a year ago." Ethan set down the book and pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her. "I'm the lucky one. I walked into that store looking for tobacco and found everything I didn't know I was missing." Adelaide kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "We're both lucky then." As winter settled over Sacramento, Adelaide noticed she'd been feeling unwell in the mornings. At first she attributed it to a passing illness, but when the nausea persisted for weeks, a different possibility occurred to her. She confided in Margaret, who confirmed her suspicions with a knowing smile. "You're expecting, dear," Margaret said gently. "Congratulations." Adelaide sat down heavily, her hand automatically going to her stomach. A baby. She was going to have a baby. The news filled her with a complicated tangle of emotions, joy and fear and wonder all mixed together. She'd always wanted children, had assumed she'd have them with Thomas, but it had never happened. Now, at 27 with a new husband and a new life, the possibility had become reality. Telling Ethan proved easier than expected. She'd worried he might not be ready, that it was too soon after their marriage, but his face when she shared the news erased all doubts. He looked at her with such awe and tenderness it made her tear up. "A baby," he breathed, pulling her close. "Adelaide, that's incredible. Are you happy?" "I am," she realized, saying it aloud. "Scared but happy. Are you?" "Terrified and thrilled in equal measure," Ethan admitted with a laugh. but mostly thrilled. We're going to be parents. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through winter and into spring. Adelaide continued her sewing work as long as she was able, though eventually her growing belly made it difficult to sit at the machine for long periods. Ethan became almost comically protective, fretting over every little thing and driving her half crazy with his concern. But Adelaide couldn't bring herself to be truly annoyed. His attentiveness came from love, and that made even his most excessive worrying endurable. In April of 1879, during a thunderstorm that reminded Adelaide of the day everything had changed with Ethan, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Ethan Irving, honoring both Adelaide's first husband and her second. The labor had been long and difficult, but the moment Adelaide held her son, all the pain faded into insignificance. He was perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same storm gray as his father's. Ethan held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He's so small," he whispered in wonder. "He'll grow," Adelaide said, exhausted but glowing. "Just like we did, just like our life together." Margaret helped during the first difficult weeks, teaching Adelaide how to nurse and soothe a colicky baby. Ethan did what he could between his ranch duties, walking the floor with Thomas during the night so Adelaide could sleep, changing nappies without complaint, staring at his son with endless fascination. Watching him become a father, seeing the gentle patience he showed even when exhausted, Adelaide fell in love with him all over again. Thomas proved to be a healthy, happy baby who smiled early and laughed often. As he grew from infant to toddler, Adelaide marveled at how much joy such a small person could bring. The cottage that had seemed perfectly adequate for two adults felt cramped with a mobile child, but they made it work. Ethan built extra shelves for Thomas's toys and Adelaide sewed a curtain to divide the bedroom, creating a small nursery space. Life settled into a new normal. Ethan continued working his way up at Harrison's ranch, taking on more responsibility as he proved his worth. Harrison made good on his original promise, offering Ethan the option to purchase 50 acres of ranch land at a favorable price. It took careful saving and planning, but by Thomas's second birthday, they'd scraped together enough for the down payment. Suddenly they weren't just tenants in a ranch cottage. They were landowners with the deed to prove it. "It's not much yet," Ethan said as they stood on their property, Thomas toddling between them holding both their hands. "But it's ours. We can build something here, Adelaide. Something that'll last." Adelaide looked at the rolling California grassland, imagining what it could become. A ranch house, maybe, with a real barn and corrals, room for cattle and horses, for a garden and fruit trees, space for Thomas to grow up with land beneath his feet and sky above his head. It was everything she'd never known she wanted, all because she'd taken a chance on the cowboy who'd walked into her failing store. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it absolutely. They broke ground on their house that summer, building slowly as time and money allowed. Harrison was generous, letting Ethan take occasional days off to work on the construction, and even lending some ranch hands to help with the heavy lifting. Adelaide packed lunches and brought Thomas to watch, her little boy delighted by all the hammering and sawing. She sketched plans for the interior, dreaming of a real parlor and separate bedrooms, a kitchen large enough to cook for a family. The house took 2 years to complete, built in stages as they could afford materials. First just the frame and walls, then the roof, then the interior divisions and finishing work. They moved in when Thomas was 4, leaving the ranch cottage for the next foreman. Adelaide walked through her new home, running her hands along walls that still smelled of fresh wood, and felt a sense of accomplishment she'd never experienced at the store. This place wasn't built on someone else's dreams. This was theirs, created through partnership and shared vision. Thomas adapted quickly to the new house, claiming a small bedroom as his own and filling it with treasures he found around the property. Interesting rocks and feathers and bits of sun-bleached bone. He was a curious child, always asking questions and exploring, with his mother's kindness and his father's steady determination. Adelaide watched him grow with a mixture of pride and poignancy, aware of how quickly childhood passed. Should we think about giving him a sibling? Ethan asked one evening after Thomas had gone to bed. They sat on their new porch, watching the sun set over their land. Adelaide had been wondering the same thing. She'd always imagined having multiple children, and Thomas was old enough now that a sibling would be playmate rather than burden. "I think I'd like that," she said. "If we're blessed with another." They were blessed, twice more in fact. A daughter arrived 2 years after they'd moved into the house, a tiny girl with Adelaide's auburn hair and a fierce temperament. They named her Sarah Margaret, after Margaret, who had remained such a faithful friend. 2 years after Sarah came another son, this one named Henry after Ethan's father who died at Shiloh. The house that had seemed so spacious with just the 3 of them grew crowded with 5, but it was a happy fullness. Adelaide sometimes marveled at the noise and chaos, remembering her quiet, lonely days at the store. She'd traded dust and silence for sticky hands and constant questions, and she wouldn't go back for anything. Ethan thrived as a father and landowner. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, a few cattle at first, then horses, then more cattle. He hired occasional help during busy seasons, young men looking for work and experience. Harrison remained supportive, sometimes sending business Ethan's way or offering advice on herd management. The 2 men had become genuine friends, bound by mutual respect and shared profession. By the time Thomas was 10, Sarah 8, and Henry 6, the Irving Ranch had become a respected operation. Not the biggest in the area, but known for quality stock and honest dealing. Adelaide had long since stopped taking in sewing, too busy managing a household and helping with ranch accounts. She kept the books with the same attention to detail she'd once given her failing store's ledgers, but now the numbers climbed instead of falling. "Remember when you walked into my store looking for tobacco?" Adelaide asked Ethan one night as they prepared for bed. The children were finally asleep after an evening of excited chaos, and the house had settled into peaceful quiet. Ethan smiled, pulling her close. "Best tobacco I never bought. I think I still have that first package somewhere, never opened it." "You're joking," Adelaide said, swatting his arm. "I'm not. Seemed wrong to use it somehow, like it would break the spell." Ethan kissed her forehead. "I knew that first day, Adelaide. Knew you were going to be important to me, even if I couldn't have said why. Just felt right being in your presence." "I thought you were just another customer I was going to disappoint with my empty shelves," Adelaide admitted. "I was so embarrassed by how little I had to offer." "You had everything I needed," Ethan said simply. "Just took you a while to notice." Adelaide thought about that, about all the times Ethan had come to her store buying unnecessary items, all the conversations and shared coffee and slow building of connection. He'd been patient, letting her come to her own realizations, never pushing but always present. He'd seen her when she'd felt invisible, valued her when she'd felt worthless, loved her when she'd thought herself unlovable. "I love you," she said, the words never losing their power no matter how often she spoke them. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I was too scared to see what you were offering." "Thank you for taking the chance when you finally did," Ethan replied. "Everything good in my life stems from that moment you told me to kiss you in your dusty store." They made love slowly, savoring each other with the comfortable familiarity of long partnership. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Ethan's arm around her, Adelaide listened to the sounds of her home, Thomas snoring softly in the next room, Sarah's occasional sleep mumbles, the creak of the house settling, the distant lowing of cattle, her life full and rich and nothing like she'd imagined back in Boston or even in those first desperate years as a widow. The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew tall and capable, taking naturally to ranch work just like his father. Sarah proved to have a gift with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animal. Henry showed signs of his grandfather's farming interests, constantly experimenting with different plants and crops on a small plot Adelaide had designated as his. They were good children, hardy and kind, raised to work hard and treat others fairly. Adelaide stayed involved with the Sacramento community, finally feeling part of it in a way she never had as the struggling widow running a failing store. She organized church socials and helped new families get established. Margaret remained her closest friend, their children growing up together. The newer stores that had once been her competition were now just neighbors, relationships built on mutual respect rather than bitter rivalry. Ethan eventually paid off their land and added another 100 acres, expanding their operation further. He hired a permanent hand, a young man from Oregon named Peter who reminded Ethan of himself at that age. Thomas apprenticed under his father, learning every aspect of ranch management. By his 18th birthday, he was essentially co-running the operation, allowing Ethan to take a slightly less grueling schedule. "I'm getting old," Ethan complained one evening, rubbing his back after a long day. "You're 42, Adelaide pointed out, amused. "Hardly ancient." "Tell that to my knees." But he was smiling. Age had been kind to Ethan, adding character rather than diminishing his vitality. A little gray at his temples, some lines around his eyes, but still strong and capable. Adelaide had aged too, her auburn hair showing threads of silver, her figure softer after 3 children. She didn't mind. These changes were earned through living, through building something meaningful. She felt more beautiful now at 41 than she ever had at 26 and desperate. Sarah announced at 15 that she wanted to become a horse trainer professionally, shocking no one who'd watched her work. Ethan built her a proper training ring and barn, and within a year, she had clients from neighboring ranches bringing horses for gentling and schooling. She was young but extraordinarily talented, and word spread quickly about her skills. Henry, at 13, remained fascinated by agriculture and announced his intention to attend the new agricultural college that had opened in Berkeley. Ethan and Adelaide scraped together money for his tuition, proud beyond words that their youngest would receive the formal education they'd never had. He left at 18, promising to return summers to help with the ranch. Thomas married at 20, a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch. They moved into the old foreman's cottage that Harrison let them have, starting their own small operation with help from both families. Adelaide became a grandmother at 43 when Emma gave birth to twin girls, and she marveled at how quickly time had passed. Seemed like only yesterday she was holding newborn Thomas, and now he had daughters of his own. Life continued its steady rhythm through the 1890s and into the new century. Sarah married a fellow horse trainer at 25, and they established a breeding program that became renowned throughout California. Henry graduated with honors and returned to help modernize the ranch's agricultural practices, implementing new techniques he'd learned in Berkeley. The Irving ranch thrived under the combined efforts of the whole family, a true multi-generational enterprise. Ethan and Adelaide gradually stepped back from daily operations, letting their children run things while they enjoyed a slower pace. They'd earned it, 3 decades of hard work building something from nothing. Their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929 was celebrated with a huge gathering, family and friends filling the house and spilling into the yard. Thomas gave a toast, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked his parents for showing him what true partnership looked like. 50 years, Adelaide said later that night as she and Ethan sat alone on their porch, the party finally winding down. Can you believe it? Some days it feels like a lifetime, other days like no time at all, Ethan replied. His hair was fully white now, his movements slower, but his eyes still held that same warmth that had captured her decades ago. Any regrets? Not a single one. Adelaide took his hand, their fingers interlacing with practiced ease. You. Only that I didn't walk into your store sooner, Ethan said with a grin. Could have had even more years together. Adelaide laughed. We've had plenty. 3 children, 8 grandchildren so far, a ranch that spans 300 acres and more memories than I can count. I'd say we did pretty well for a failing widow and a wandering cowboy. Pretty well indeed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge as darkness deepened. Adelaide thought about that dusty store, the desperate woman she'd been, the loneliness that had threatened to swallow her whole. She thought about Ethan appearing in her doorway like an answer to prayers she hadn't known to speak. She thought about the long, slow building of trust and love, the risks taken and rewarded, the life they'd created together from determination and hope. What are you thinking about? Ethan asked, the same question he'd been asking for decades. How lucky I am, Adelaide said, the same answer she'd given that first time. How different my life is from what I thought it would be. Better or worse? Better, Adelaide said without hesitation. So much better. You saved me, Ethan. Not just from the failing store, but from giving up on myself, on life. We saved each other, Ethan corrected gently. I was lost too, Adelaide, just going through the motions, working toward some vague future that didn't mean much. You gave me purpose, family, home, everything that matters. Adelaide leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. This was love, she thought. Not the dramatic passion of novels, though they'd had their share of that too. But this deep, abiding partnership, built through shared labor and mutual respect, and choosing each other every single day for 50 years. The years that followed were gentler. Ethan's health began failing around 70, his heart not as strong as it once was. Adelaide cared for him with the same devotion he'd always shown her, refusing to let anyone else take over despite her own advancing age. They'd made this journey together, and they would finish it the same way. He died on a Tuesday morning in spring, peacefully in his sleep with Adelaide beside him. She held his hand and felt his spirit slip away, grief crashing over her like a physical force. But mixed with the pain was gratitude. They'd had 53 years of marriage, a lifetime of love and partnership. How many people could say that? The funeral drew people from all over the state, testament to the impact Ethan had made. Thomas delivered the eulogy, barely holding himself together as he spoke about his father's integrity and kindness. Sarah and Henry added their own memories, painting a picture of a man who'd been more than just a rancher or a father, but a genuinely good person who'd made everyone around him better. Adelaide accepted condolences with grace, though inside she felt hollowed out. The house was full of family, but without Ethan it felt empty. She wandered through rooms that echoed with memories, touching things he'd built or mended, seeing him in every corner, but she didn't break. Ethan had taught her strength, shown her resilience. She mourned deeply, let herself feel the full weight of loss, but she didn't shatter. He wouldn't have wanted that. Thomas and Emma moved into the main house to care for Adelaide, refusing to let her live alone despite her protests. She appreciated their presence more than she'd admit, the sounds of family keeping the loneliness at bay. Grandchildren visited frequently, and great-grandchildren began appearing, new life continuing the cycle. Adelaide lived another 8 years after Ethan's passing, dying just short of her 85th birthday in 1940. She spent those final years sharing stories with her grandchildren, making sure they knew where they'd come from. She told them about the failing store, the cowboy who kept coming back, the leap of faith that had changed everything. She wanted them to understand that their prosperous ranch and happy family had grown from the smallest seed, planted by two people who'd simply refused to give up on each other or themselves. On her last day, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Ethan had created, Adelaide felt at peace. She'd lived a full life, loved deeply and been loved in return. The scared, lonely widow who'd swept dusty shelves seemed like a different person entirely, and in many ways she was. Love had transformed her, given her purpose and strength she'd never known she possessed. "Tell me about Grandpa Ethan," her youngest great-grandchild requested, a boy of 5 who'd never met the man but heard endless stories. Adelaide smiled, her voice weak but clear. "He was a cowboy who came into my store one day looking for tobacco, kept coming back, week after week, until finally I noticed what he was really looking for. Me. And everything good in my life came from having the courage to say yes when he asked me to take a chance on us. Did you love him?" The boy asked with a child's directness. "More than anything," Adelaide said, "more than anything in the whole world." She closed her eyes, feeling herself drift, and her last conscious thought was of Ethan waiting for her, hat in hand and that familiar warmth in his storm-gray eyes, ready to begin whatever adventure came next. Together, just as they'd always been. The Irving ranch continued for generations, growing and adapting with the times but never losing the core values Ethan and Adelaide had instilled. Their story became family legend, told and retold until it took on mythic proportions. The failing store, the persistent cowboy, the widow who found the courage to love again. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come not from grand gestures but from showing up consistently, from seeing worth in others when they can't see it themselves, from being patient enough to let love grow at its own pace. And in Sacramento, where a modern shopping center now stood where Adelaide's failing store once struggled, occasionally someone would pause and wonder about the lives that had intersected there, the ordinary moments that had bloomed into extraordinary love. The cowboy and the widow, 2 people who'd saved each other without even meaning to, who'd built a legacy that lasted far beyond their own years. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the land Ethan and Adelaide had purchased with scraped-together savings and impossible hope. The ranch house they'd built stood solid, renovated and expanded but fundamentally the same. And on quiet evenings when the California sun set golden over the rolling hills, it almost seemed like you could see them there on the porch, 2 figures sitting close together, hands intertwined, watching the stars emerge and counting their blessings, grateful for the day a cowboy walked into a failing store and everything changed.